Hey guys, we are back with chapter 4 of Come See the Fair. It's called The Pavilion of Magic. Alright, the last time we were together, we read chapter 3, and in chapter 3, Henry and Ava were looking for the Pavilion of Magic, and they couldn't find it, and then right at the end, they found it. So that's where we are now. They're first walking in. Chapter 4, The Pavilion of Magic. Ava and Henry found themselves in a high, narrow entryway. The air on this side of the door was different, denser, somehow more substantial. The sunlight fell in thick beams, and the hulking house seemed to pull them in as if they were constantly walking gently downhill. Even the silence here was heavy. Ava turned back to ease the door shut, but it was no longer there. There was only a turnstile spinning lazily in the breeze. "Ava," said Henry, "what is this place?" On their right, a low table held a spray of thin, pink peach blossoms. Ava reached out and found them cold and hard, tinkling leaves of glass so thin and delicate that they bent beneath a single finger. Ava smiled. "This," she said, "is the Pavilion of Magic." The dam in her mind burst as they stepped over the threshold, and she spoke now with full fluency. How she'd stumbled into this estate through the lions and manufacturers and liberal arts. How she'd met the man on the porch not an hour past. "But have you ever been here before?" said Henry. "Inside?" She couldn't keep a grin from creeping onto her cheeks. "Come on," she said, and she pulled him forward. It wasn't that Ava had forgotten what Mr. Magister had said, that she was expected only tomorrow, but there was just so much excitement. Henry's astonishment, her curiosity. The scheduling seemed like little concern. What were a few hours between friends? Beyond the entryway was a great front hall, all wooden beams and marble floors. Here the hefty silence almost echoed. On the far side of the hall stood a broad staircase, its steps lined with a thick red carpeting. Halfway up, where it split in two, there was a tall window of shining stained glass depicting Mr. Magister, gem-like, in waistcoat and tails. The likeness, however, was unfinished, and a panel of plain glass, oddly clean and white, peered out like a blank skull where his face should have been. "That's him," said Henry. "Isn't it? The man that I was drawing?" Ava nodded. "Part of him, at least." The light in the hall was very odd, and as Ava's eyes continued to rise, she soon saw why. The beams and pillars that formed the vaulted rib cage of the hall were real, live oak trees, Spanish moss hanging down like royal banners from their boughs. Ava was sure that she could see sunlight glimmering through the densely woven foliage. Shards of sunlight above, stained glass ahead, but still something nagged at Ava's eye. All of the illumination didn't seem accounted for. It was only when she looked down that she understood. In the very center of the marble floor, beneath Ava's feet, an emblem had been worked in colored granite, a great flaming bonfire that itself somehow contributed to the brightness of the hall. Each time she looked away, the arrangement of the flames seemed to shift. Gingerly, she stepped back. "Ava," said Henry, whispering to avoid disturbing the hush, Are you sure we're supposed to be here?" "Of course," said Ava, as if she were a good deal more confident than she actually felt. Beneath the overhanging mezzanine, two parallel archways led back into the house. The left, to which Henry was drawn, seemed to show a dim and flickering light, and the right, which called to Ava, looked misty and cool. If they hadn't been there together, they would have taken different paths. But Henry had a way of seeing things clearly. "Wait," he said, his heels echoing against the marble floor like a battery of distant cannon fire. "We ought to stay together. It is too easy to get lost." Ava nodded. Side by side, they passed through the right-hand arch, and on the far side they found a sitting room, all cushy furniture and long, creamy curtains. Henry seemed very taken with the view from the windows, but Ava's attention was soon pulled away. Someone had just left the room. She was certain of it. She could smell linen, perfume. Did she recognize that smell? And there was a presence, surely, just out of sight, somewhere through the next doorway. Somebody was there, and Ava wanted to see her. "Hey," she called, so softly that only she and the house could possibly hear. "Come back." And without a second thought, she went through the door. In the dining room, a heavy table seemed to have grown up out of the very floor, its gnarled root toes twining into grassy green carpet. On the surface of the table, a banquet had been laid. It was a summer's worth of peaches, pale pink and white, rich red and gold, some as big as melons, some as small as pastilles. There were carafes of effervescent peach wine and great, seared peach steaks steaming from the grill. A tureen in the middle of the table held a fragrant peach consommé, and small silver bowls at each of the many places were heaped with scoops of peach-colored mousse. The aroma was so thick you could almost touch it, and Henry, following in from the sitting room, swallowed hungrily. But Ava could barely pay attention. She was sure, someone had just gone through. Ava followed eagerly into the library. This room was a dark glory, armored in walnut and swaddled in scarlet. The smell of ancient volumes hung thick in the air, leather, paper, a light peppering of dust. But nearly as strong in Ava's nose was the swirling scent of the man who seemed to have just left, as different from the smell in the sitting room as could be, and yet just as strangely deeply familiar. Soap and sweat, tobacco and spice. Something stirred beneath the surface of her memory. Across the room, Henry was speaking, reading out the titles of volumes on the shelf. Magus, or Celestial Intelligencer, The Triangular Book of Saint Germain. Fire flickered in the hearth, sending shadows of armchairs and reading desks leaping up across the bookcases. Secretum Secretorum, Lives of Necromancers. These were intriguing titles, and at any other time Ava might have lingered to look, but there was someone just outside the library, someone she'd been waiting her whole life to meet. She was moving rapidly towards the next door when she heard rustling overhead. "Henry?" she said, her voice taut and trembling. Henry stopped. His hand was half extended, reaching for a thick book. There, on the dim upper ledge of the bookcase, its eyes fixed on Henry like gleaming silver dollars, sat a great preening eagle. It snapped its hooked beak. Henry froze. Long, breathless moments passed before Ava noticed the firelight reflected in the eagle's varnished plumage. The bird, it seemed, had been carved from the same wood as the bookcases. Henry backed away slowly, the eagle's sharp talons following, clacking along the upper ledge of the bookcase until he and Ava made their way into the next room. Now they found themselves in the game room, where billiard balls grew from small ivory trees. Cloud formations of fragrant cigar smoke drifted just below the ceiling, and Henry, enchanted as ever, couldn't resist stopping to marvel. But Ava didn't linger. He was there, just ahead, once again, just through the door. Not Mr. Magister, not Uncle Jefferson, but someone far better, far more important. And she had to catch him. She just had to. "Come back," she murmured. "Please come back." Door after door, turn after turn, room after room after room after room. Here a workshop scattered with heavy tools. There a music chamber full of strange instruments. There was a great loom that chittered and champed as if it were hungry to weave. There was a humid glass conservatory planted thick with green, and always just beyond, just out of sight, the feeling of someone very dear. It was in the vaulted kitchen that she finally slowed her feet. She was sure that she had just heard somebody in here, the clang of a wooden spoon on the side of a copper pot, but, of course, she'd only just missed them. She always seemed to while she was in this house. There was something on the stove, a steaming concoction that gave off the aroma of parched earth after rain, and on the cutting board nearby somebody had cut neat, even slices from a large stone. "Henry," she said, "look." And only in that moment did she realize that she left him far behind. Where was she? The next room was a servants' hall, and there Ava paused before the bellboard. Small silver bells wore labels to indicate where help was wanted. Dining room, morning room, master bedroom. These were all sensible enough, but further down the names grew strange. Incense vault, antique stable yard, greater crucible. One bell, just labeled elsewhere, was twitching violently, somehow unable to ring. If they had truly been here at all, the man and woman Ava followed seemed to have gone on from this room. Idly, Ava peered through the next doorway. Parquet flooring giving way to reeds and cattails and a sprawling pond beneath a canopied ceiling. Ava was terribly frustrated. No matter what she did, no matter how many rooms she traversed, they were never quite there. Or rather they were, but always just out of reach. Well, she was done playing this game. She would not go any further. In a huff, she sat down in a creaky wooden chair. And it was only here that she began to understand. Her mind wandered, running back through the rooms she traversed, and she tried to string them together in an orderly sequence. The longer she thought, though, the more they seemed to resist consolidation, as if each room in the pavilion was a universe unto itself. Gradually, the particular pleasant fog that surrounded the pavilion settled about Ava's mind. The lap of the water and the croak of the frogs in the room next door echoed in her ear, and soon, tired and sore, she lifted her feet onto the table. Time passed. Who could say how much? And Ava felt peckish. She was just about to call out and ask when dinner would be, when out of the corner of her eye, Ava saw, passing by on the sunlit tiling, the single most extraordinary thing she had ever seen in her life. Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother. She'd never seen her before, of course, never known her, but now she knew her for certain, as unquestionably as she knew her own self. Her mother was there, wiping her hands on her apron, bustling with the business of the day. Tears sprang immediately to Ava's eyes, and it was a moment before she recognized, through the lap and croak in the pond room, the whirring of Father's fishing rod. Mother on one side, Father on the other, and Ava, safe and sound, in between. What was it like to have a family? What was it like to be at home? This. It was like this. Perhaps the pavilion had not brought her parents back to her, but it had given her the next best thing. This feeling in her heart. Time passed. Who could say how much? And deep within the house, another sound rose to her attention. Raised voices. People were arguing. Ava turned her head sharply, eager to hear more clearly, and without warning, Mother and Father were gone, just as they always had been. Where was Henry? Ava leapt to her feet and darted out of the servants' hall, following the sound of the echoing argument through the empty kitchen as quickly as she possibly could. Room after room, corridor after corridor, and eventually the formless voices began to resolve themselves into sharp, angry words. "Because," she heard Mr. Magister say, "that is what is required of you. I owe you no explanation." A boy's voice piped up in aggravated response. "But it makes no sense," he said. "Why on earth do you need more? What good could it possibly do?" Ava charged down the long gallery, its walls lined with strange art that seemed to somehow breathe, and she was just about to call out when a handful of cold, strong fingers closed around her wrist. Ava spun around. For a silent, dizzying moment, she thought she had been seized by the bronze idol now facing her, but then she understood. The hand that had taken hold of her was coming from right behind the statue. It was Henry. He put his finger to his lips and beckoned her to the statue's nook. The voices were growing closer. Swiftly, Ava wedged herself beside him. But if Henry was here, then who was arguing with Mr. Magister? The answer came barreling down the long gallery before she had a chance to catch her breath. The boy was slight. His pale cheeks glowed scarlet with anger, and his straw-colored hair shot out in many different directions at once, almost willfully unruly. "But you don't understand," he was saying. "It takes everything I've got inside me." He seemed to be on the verge of tears. "Of all people, Valclave, do you think I do not understand?" said Mr. Magister. "Do not confuse your own weakness for my ignorance." Valclave spun on his heel. "Don't you call me weak." Ava's mouth hung open. She couldn't possibly imagine speaking to a man like Mr. Magister in such a manner. "Denying your weakness, yes, Valclave, your weakness will not save you from it. You know the terms of our agreement. Either you do what is required of you, or what you have taken from the pavilion will be reclaimed." Valclave scoffed. "I don't know how you think you can," but Mr. Magister cut in. "I do." There was a heavy pause. "I'm going home," said Valclave, turning away once more, and he charged around the far corner to the long gallery. "Go, then," said Mr. Magister. "I have never sought to stop you, but don't expect the doors of the pavilion to open easily unless you return to pay what you owe." Henry darted softly up and out, eager to hear what was said. Ava tried to grab hold of him, but he was out of reach before she began to move, and, with a sigh, she followed him. Valclave and Mr. Magister were standing before a great door at the end of the adjoining hallway, its stone arch richly carved. Gears and hammers, wreaths and rosettes of railroad track and telegraph wire. At the peak of the arch a lion's head stared, open-eyed, and the copper hinges that held the door in place were grasping gloves. There was no doorknob. "I want to go home," said Valclave to the door. The lion at the peak of the doorway blinked. Behind Valclave's back, Mr. Magister gave a gentle nod, and the gloves that Ava had taken for hinges flexed and grasped, pulling the door open. From her position, Ava couldn't see the place beyond the door, but there was a shift in the light and a crunching of footsteps, and an acrid stench that began to pervade the hallway. "Valclave," said Mr. Magister, "I warn you. There is no hiding from magic. Not even to where you go now." "Goodbye," said Valclave, and he went through the door. Softly, it swung shut behind him. Mr. Magister sighed and mopped his brow. His bow tie undid itself, and his deft-gloved fingers unfastened his uppermost button. After a moment, he retrieved the golden pocket watch from his waistcoat, muttering to himself as he popped the case open. "Foolish boy," he said, and he was just about to turn when something on the watch face caught his eye. His eyebrows fell, and then, to Ava's horror, he peered down the hallway. He peered right towards them. "Ava?" he said. Behind her, Henry's eyes widened. Again, louder. "Ava, is that you?" Panic lit Henry's face. Ava took a deep breath and stepped out into the open. "Hello," she said. "Why, Ava," said Mr. Magister, "I didn't expect you until tomorrow." Ava nodded eagerly. "I know," she said, "I know, but I was just so excited." Mr. Magister gave a wan smile. "I understand," he said, "but I'm afraid I'm rather weary tonight. Did you—" Again his eyes fell to his watch, and something there caught his concern. "Ava," he said, "are you alone?" Ava tried to draw breath, but it stuck in her throat. Her cheeks began to burn, and before she managed to speak, Henry stepped out into the hallway behind her. "Ah," said Mr. Magister. He was already in motion, his golden watch slotted into his waistcoat pocket, his nimble fingers fastening the collar. "What is your name, young man?" The bow tie retied itself with a sharp snick. "Poole," said Henry. "Henry Poole." Mr. Magister bowed gently. "What a delight," he said with a smile. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Poole. I do not believe you visited us before." "No," said Henry, "I haven't." Mr. Magister nodded. "Then Miss Root must have brought you inside." "Yes," said Henry. "Of course," said Mr. Magister. "I see. It may be, then, that this is our only opportunity for acquaintance, young Mr. Poole. I regret that my house is generally rather particular about whom it admits. I can't come back? There was something just short of panic in Henry's voice. Why, Mr. Poole, nothing would please me more, but I'm afraid my desire is not the only consideration in the matter. The house is accustomed to welcoming only those candidates with a demonstrated aptitude for the practice of our impossible art. But I shouldn't worry. It is altogether unlikely that the disappointment shall linger. In fact, I should be surprised indeed if you even remember this conversation. But Mr. Magister, said Ava, on the train he showed me sketches, incredible sketches of the fairgrounds that Mr. Magister smiled gently. Very nice, he said, but not every artist is a magician, I'm afraid. No, said Ava, no, but he drew them before he had ever seen the fair. This seemed to pique Mr. Magister's interest. Before? Really? Ava nodded. And you'd seen no photographs? Nothing. No, sir, said Henry. Mr. Magister held out his hand, and Henry lifted his sketchbook. Mr. Magister paced idly as he leafed through it, nodding and frowning at the fairground sketches before him. He didn't seem entirely convinced. Please, said Ava. Please, she said again. He has magic, I am sure of it. He even drew you. Oddly, this assertion seemed to comfort Mr. Magister. Ah, he said, shutting the sketchbook, you must be mistaken. I'm afraid it is simply not possible. But it looks just like you, said Ava. No, said Henry softly. No, Ava, I don't think it was him. Ava's eyes grew wide in disbelief. She knew what she had seen. Remember the fellow at the Michigan building? Said Henry. He said it was someone else. There, said Mr. Magister, you see? But Ava's mind had snagged on the man at the Michigan building. Gaberman. What name had he given to the face in Henry's portrait? Beside her, Henry's eyebrows dropped. Ava could see the same confusion massing his mind. What name had it been? And then, like a sudden match in the darkness, it was there. Coagulo, she said. Jack Coagulo. Mr. Magister stopped. He stood staring for a long moment, and then abruptly he opened the notebook and flipped rapidly until he found the portrait in question. Ah, yes, he said. There it is. Now he turned his eyes to the facing page. And what is written here? Henry cleared his throat. The name and lodgings of the fellow who... yes, said Mr. Magister, interrupting brightly. I see. Why, how pleased I am to have been wrong. You are evidently a young man of great talent, Mr. Poole, and I will be very glad of your further acquaintance. A broad smile crossed Ava's cheeks. So he can come back? Mr. Magister nodded graciously. I shall count on it. Henry, I hope you will allow me to keep this portrait as a memento of our meeting? And without waiting for an answer, Mr. Magister tore 2 pages carefully from the sketchbook, folded them away neatly, and returned them back to Henry's hand. Henry blinked. How terribly kind of you, said Mr. Magister. Now, where can I ask my doorway to deposit you? I should like our further acquaintance of all things, but, as I say, I am fairly wrung out this evening, and I'm afraid we shall have to wait. Overstreet House, said Ava, Prairie Avenue. Mr. Magister nodded and turned to the arched doorway. Overstreet House, he said. The line at the height of the arch gave a heavy blink. Please, sir, said Henry, I'm afraid we were meant to meet our driver at the 64th Street turnstiles, and if we arrive home without him... Mr. Magister nodded. Yes, I see. What time was set for your meeting? 4 o'clock. Mr. Magister winced. Oh, goodness, he said. But we shall see what we can do. All right. There's another 15 minutes of reading out of this chapter, so I'm going to save it for next. Well, I'm going to post another one later on this week. So, that was half of chapter 4. Thank you for joining me, and stay tuned for the second half coming later on in the week. All right, bye.